Welcome, everyone, to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights' first annual public meeting. My name is Angela Cassie, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the day. This afternoon, we've also made American Sign Language available. Please let us know if you are not able to see. Unfortunately, we had a slight lighting issue, but we can certainly make every effort to make it more visible. La langue de signe américaine est aussi.
Translation. American Sign Language is also available, so if you haven't done so, please let us know if you need this service.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Manitoba Museum for allowing us to use this space. Je tiens à remercier, puis j'ai vu Claudette Novo.
I would like to thank the Manitoba Museum for letting us use this space.
That you've given to us today. So the order of the day will be as follows. We're going to begin with a number of presentations, beginning with our board chair. Our president and CEO will be doing a content walkthrough presentation, and then we'll provide a little bit of insight in terms of both our oral history program, as well as our digital interaction and our inclusive design initiatives. Following that will be a question and answer period, which will last for approximately 15 minutes. And please note, for the media present, there will be media available after the event, and at that point, we'll be able to conduct one-on-one interviews. Alors pour les médias qui sont là.
For media present, the question and answer period is for the general public, so we ask you to wait until after the meeting, and representatives will be available for questioning.
Questions for the question and answer that have been submitted via the web, online, through Twitter and through Facebook. And so while we will be taking answers from the floor, our intention is also to allow some of those who weren't able to attend in person to inquire. Alors, l'intention de la session.
The purpose of the question and answer period is to offer the opportunity to the public to ask us questions. We will also include some questions from people who are not here in person, but are listening to us online. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge the 22nd anniversary of the Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. This event, in which 14 female students lost their lives, forced to the foreground the issues of violence against women and the evolution of human rights. We will observe a moment of silence for the lives that were taken.
Taking a moment of silence to recognize that today marks the 22nd anniversary of the Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. This tragic event and the loss of the lives of 14 female students forced to the foreground the important issues of violence against women and of women's rights. We would like to take a moment of silence now to remember the precious lives that were lost. Please join me. Thank you. I'd like to begin by introducing the chair of our Board of Trustees. Je tiens à présenter le
I would like to introduce the chair of our Board of Trustees
of the museum in 2008. Arnie is president and principal of Shelter Canadian Properties Limited, and he and his wife, Susan Glass, are both active volunteers in the nonprofit sector. He also serves on a number of boards, including the boards of the Banff Centre and the Historica Dominion Institute. Veuillez vous joindre à moi pour accueillir.
Please join me in welcoming Mr. Arnie Thorstensen.
Thank you, Angela, and good afternoon. Merci de votre présence aujourd'hui. Thank you to all who have joined us at the Manitoba Museum today, and a special welcome to those who are joining us online from across Canada and around the world. This has been a remarkable year of progress, discovery, challenge, and growth at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I welcome this public opportunity to share our progress over the past 12 months. We at the museum often talk about our mission being twofold. We are building a museum that will be unlike any other. That part you know and can visibly see just down Waterfront Drive today. But an even more important than the concrete and steel and the beautiful glass, we're building a conversation, a uniquely Canadian conversation that people from every corner of the country are becoming part of. This is a conversation about human rights challenges, but more than that, it's a conversation about individual and collective aspirations. It is a conversation about what our country and other nations can and should strive to be. A conversation about what each of you can do to make a genuine, discernible difference in the lives of those around us. In particular, in the lives of those whose right to live without prejudice or barrier to opportunity has been compromised. This is a conversation that challenges us to find the courage and the commitment to be a force for change. It's a conversation that implores us to go on to motivate others to take up the cause of protecting and promoting the rights to which each of us is equally entitled. It is in this sense that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is so much more than just a museum. The building of the CMHR is a call to action. It is a dialogue about how we, as citizens, can together find ways to make our world a bit better than we found it. It is an abiding optimism that humanity's best days can be the days still to come. The museum's Board of Trustees recognizes that the conversations that we are forging takes each one of us. It takes all of us gathered here for today's meeting. It takes every person who will eventually come through our doors or visit us online. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights is Canada's museum. It's your museum. It is a museum developed by Canadians that we together will share with the world. Today, we continue in the tradition that has guided our work over the past, and will continue to guide us as we build toward our opening. Coming together to share our experiences. We cannot wait until the day when we welcome our first visitors. And in particular, I'd like to highlight students and teachers. We have witnessed over the past year tremendous efforts by young people who have been working with us to help move this project forward through fundraising efforts and through inspirational projects. Young leaders are starting human rights groups and organizations, implementing anti-bullying programs in their schools, volunteering in their communities, building and auctioning guitars to help us build the museum, and standing up for the rights of others across the country and around the world. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights will be an opportunity for more young people to visit a Canadian institution that will broaden their understanding of human rights. We have a strong heritage of human rights defenders, hundreds of them, who can serve as an example of perseverance, resilience, dedication, and optimism. even when faced with insurmountable odds. Can you imagine the impact on our nation when we expose thousands of students per year to Canadian and international human rights stories, issues, and events? The museum will help to equip Canadian and international youth to become catalysts for change and ambassadors for the promotion and protection of human rights. As we saw recently in Winnipeg during We Day at the MTS Centre, 16,000 students attended. The leaders of tomorrow are already often leaders today, in the schoolyards, in the classrooms, on the sports field, in their arts endeavors, and in their individual communities. This year, however, has not been without its challenges. Under the leadership of the museum's president and CEO, Stuart Murray, the CMR management team and staff have been careful stewards of this important project. They have worked diligently to lever the efficiencies and identify cost savings. Stuart will share a little more detail around these initiatives. The museum's leadership team continues to work diligently to ensure that we operate within our operating budget and that these precious funds are used in a responsible and transparent way. We remain focused on our three highest priorities, which are: complete the construction of our iconic building, develop the museum's inaugural content, and establishing our institution as one of the premier museums and education centers in the world. Today is an opportunity to reflect on the conversation we've been building over the past 12 months and to reaffirm our commitment to expanding that conversation together as we continue to move ahead. Let me thank my fellow board members and CMHR employees for their continued commitment to this project. Let me also, on behalf of the board, thank all of our partners from the Government of Canada, the Province of Manitoba, the City of Winnipeg, and the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Thank you all for your ongoing commitment and collaboration. As Canada's 5th national museum and the first museum to be located outside of the National Capital Region, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights has great responsibility and one that we take very seriously. We are committed to living up to and hopefully exceeding your expectations and the expectations of all Canadians. Allow me to thank you once again for your presence at this important inaugural meeting today. Merci.
Merci, Arnie. Thank you, Arnie. Let me move into our next speaker. I'd like to now introduce Stuart Murray. J'aimerais présenter notre président.
I would like now to introduce the President and CEO of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights.
President and CEO of the St. Boniface Hospital Research Foundation, and worked in a variety of interesting positions, including leader of the Manitoba PC Party and road manager for the band Blood, Sweat and Tears. Please join me in welcoming Stuart Murray. Veuillez vous joindre à moi.
Please join me.
How about that picture? That wasn't Ashley that I was with. That was Mia Farrow, just in case anybody said, wow, she looked different. Thanks, Angela, for the introduction and for emceeing our inaugural annual public meeting. Merci à tous d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you for being with us today. We're very happy to see a number of our partners present today.
For joining us today. I'm exceptionally grateful that so many of our partners are with us today, both here in the room and virtually. The educators, the business community leaders, the students, the elders, the activists, the advocates, the individual citizens who have joined us in this journey. This journey is like no other. There has been no path set out for us. We are path making, and we are driven by an entrepreneurial spirit. You won't be at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights merely a visitor, because we don't view those who come through our doors just as guests. We see those who come to the museum as our partners. We see them as agents of change. And of course, the word change evokes a process, and consistent with the language of the mission we've set out for ourselves, we describe the visitor experience as a journey. This journey will be about learning, about empowerment and action. We will shine a light in dark corners, amplify the voices of those who have been silenced, and encourage people to take a stand for human rights. From the museum's roots and rising up from the ground, visitors will ascend through the galleries by a series of ramps, visiting over 47,000 square feet of exhibit space, encountering captivating stories of struggle, perseverance, resilience, hope, and triumph. Through this journey, we will paint a broad vision of human rights to help our visitors understand and to appreciate what we mean when we talk about looking at the world through a human rights lens. The museum will provide visitors with a space for dialogue about human rights issues. It will encourage visitors to reflect on human rights affect their own lives, and it will inspire visitors to take action in their communities and abroad. We'll hear about the exhibits in more detail later in the program, but what is the most compelling element of this project and this process is that the story of the museum must be read in all of its chapters. It is through this entire journey that the story must be told. And we don't want the journey to end when you simply leave the doors of the museum. We want it to continue long after, with a better appreciation and different perspectives, with a sense of human rights journey both in Canada and abroad, and ultimately inspired and challenged to take action in your home, in your community, at your school, or at your workplace. Your insight, your experience, and your passion for this project are already shaping this magnificent institution. I want to extend my sincere thanks for your contributions, but more than that, I want to thank you for challenging us always to keep reaching higher, to seek out the different angle, to listen to that other voice, to ensure that we are building a museum that truly reflects the best and the highest ideals that our country can offer. I'd also like to echo the words of our chairman and acknowledge the tremendous contributions of each member of the Board of Trustees, and some of them are joining us today. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to acknowledge Connie Gluby, Vin Kochar, Senator Kochar, Lini Ledahowski, Gail Asper, and Yves Leberge. They're sitting with us joining today. Merci beaucoup. So most of all, I'd like to acknowledge the tremendous contributions of each member of the Board of Trustees, and I'd also like to acknowledge and give my sincere thanks to our talented, dedicated, and impossibly hardworking staff. Un grand merci à notre personnel.
Thank you to our exceptional staff.
Is blessed with some of Canada's most creative, most accomplished, and most respected professionals in the human rights field. Not only do we benefit from their talent, but we benefit from their remarkable commitment. In many cases, these are people who left highly rewarding positions elsewhere so that they could be in Winnipeg to invest in this community and help build the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. The hours are long, the work is intense, but the museum is ultimately going to succeed because of your contribution. As the chair carefully noted, of course, bringing the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to life takes much more than our efforts as an organization. This is a distinctly Canadian effort, and this has been a year of expanding the collaboration of conversations that the chairman spoke of earlier. Canadians have set a high bar. They've set something that the dreamer, Izzy Asper, established for us to all follow. And Canadians expect excellence. They expect us to get it right. The most critical aspect of our journey is to meet those high standards that Canadians have set for us. And I want to speak with you today about this journey. J'aimerais vous parler de cette...
I would like to talk to you about this journey today.
And our challenges. What we've learned along the way. What's working well, and what we're taking the time to give more focus to as we build this conversation with Canadians across this great land. In so many areas, we're making clear progress. Each of us in this room are entitled to a distinct sense of pride today. You know, even a few months ago, when I'd give a speech about the museum, I'd run through the numbers talking about the volume of concrete and the amount of steel in the building, how the museum is a third taller than the Golden Boy. But I no longer have to rely on statistics to illustrate the magnitude of the structure, because you can see with your own eyes in person or online how magnificent this iconic building is and what it does for our skyline. The progress has been phenomenal. The building is already, as I say, defining the Winnipeg skyline, but perhaps more importantly, it's defining the human rights landscape of Canada. Most Canada knows that there is a renaissance now happening in Winnipeg. I mean, just think about it. The new James A. Richardson International Airport, Centerport, the return of that team, they called that NHL team, it's the Winnipeg, right, gotcha. The Winnipeg Jets. You know, major downtown renewal through the work of Centre Venture, the revitalization of the city's signature public park, the Assiniboia Park. We're very proud that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is at the fore of this very positive and very momentous change. But let me be clear, even if you never step foot in this museum when it's done, if you're in the city, you will be a beneficiary of the museum's presence here in the heart of Canada. Let me explain. The economic benefits of this project are already being realized. The construction project alone has created the equivalent of 6,000 full-time jobs, equivalent jobs, I should say. People have come to work at the museum from a wide variety of places, from small business, universities, government, and other cultural institutions. We've attracted a top-flight academics who have now adjunct professor affiliate appointments at our universities. The people who are here with their families solely because of the museum. Already, our brand and business development teams are making plans with organizations and agencies from around the globe to bring major international conferences to Winnipeg. These groups are, for the first time, looking at Winnipeg, Manitoba, to host their conferences because the museum is here. And our local restaurants and our hotels, our municipal tax base, they all stand to benefit enormously. The museum and its partners recognize that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights can be the catalyst that puts Winnipeg on the map as an international tourist destination. If the success of our guided summer tours of the perimeter of the construction site provide any indication to the interest we have had, just under 1,000 Winnipeggers, Manitobans, and other visitors joined the city to watch firsthand as this iconic building takes shape and learn more about the project. In fact, some of these visitors, as we register, came from places as far away as Australia and Turkey. Part of this work involves welcoming international delegations and representatives from nations like Germany, Russia, South Africa, Ukraine, Japan, France, and China, just to name a few of who we did welcome last year. But the primary focus of our economic journey has been aggressive work in our target markets, tapping niche markets within the burgeoning field of human rights tourism, a field that our organization intends to help both brand and grow. Similarly, development of niche revenue generating opportunities. As an example, fair trade retail is one key example, is happening as we speak. Why are we pursuing these opportunities? because we've come to recognize that the museum has the potential to provide a dividend much greater than the change of how Canadians think about human rights, significant as that objective may be. We believe we have a commitment to ensure the museum delivers a clear net benefit to a wider community and provides a distinct value to all Canadians, both as citizens and, yes, as taxpayers. External studies show that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is projected to generate millions in new municipal, provincial, and federal taxes alone in perpetuity. The Manitoba Bureau of Statistics estimates that total tax revenue from operations alone to be over $8 million a year. We consider this a good start. C'est un bon début. Aggressively pursuing new opportunities for revenue generation and economic partnership will continue to be a critical focus as we move ahead. Of course, while we work to expand revenue-generating opportunities, we also have a distinct responsibility to be careful with every dollar that we spend. Our public funding partners, the federal government, the Manitoba government, the City of Winnipeg, have shown remarkable support for the museum. We acknowledge their vision and we applaud their investment. Merci pour votre appui. We also recognize that this is the time of continued fiscal restraint for all governments. And just as they work to identify cost savings and reduce their own expenditures, we must also work to reduce ours. As a startup organization with no blueprint for our development, imposing internal budgetary reductions at a time that we must also expand our capacity to build our exhibits is a challenging task. That said, no part of our journey has ever been without some element of challenge. And we accept that reductions and restraint are an essential part of that journey, even as we continue to build. As a demonstration of that restraint, I can report to you today that we will realize approximately $10 million in reductions over this fiscal year alone. Let me give you a few examples to illustrate how we've achieved that. Our published financial projections from previous years indicate that we were to hire 35 new employees over this fiscal year. Instead, to reduce costs, we moved to a critical hire basis and deferred hiring for most positions. Instead of the projected 35 new hires, the museum hired just 17 positions, resulting in cost savings of $2.5 million. We've cut our travel budgets. Discretionary travel costs have been cut by $400,000 as we've curtailed non-essential travel and moved to hold more of our board and partnership meetings by teleconference instead of in person. Further, we've reduced our marketing expenditures. And for example, many of the Friends ads that you see now are already negotiated via sponsorship agreements and do not represent a cost to the museum or to Friends. But we've gone further, trimming marketing costs by some $600,000 alone this year. These measures are already proving their worth, and that's because cost challenges on the capital side have also become a part of our journey. This, we've come to know, is the raw reality of bringing one of the most ambitious architectural undertakings ever attempted in this country to life. When our engineers discovered that poor soil conditions would require an additional investment for building supports, for example, we had to deal with that, despite it being an unforeseen challenge outside the scope of our control. When we were advised by our engineers that the soil retention system on the 4 root systems, 3 of them specifically, would come in higher than forecast, we obviously had to manage that. And we've learned that unexpected capital costs aren't fully avoidable when you're building something this unique. It's for this reason, for this very reason, that we will continue to move aggressively with cost reductions on the operations side. We know that Canadians expect fiscal prudence. Steps to reduce our operating budget wherever we can will continue. Our fiscal pressures are not insignificant. They have direct bearing on every aspect of the operations, including timelines around the exhibit development and construction. Things like major purchasing and the date that we will inaugurate our building. As our chairman said, we anticipate base building construction to be complete in line with our timeline of 2012. And we are working towards an inauguration of 2014 and have aligned our project plans and our work plans accordingly. We are exploring all of our options to confirm this scheduling and making sure that it is feasible and achievable. And we will be able to confirm this date in coming months. But this too is part of our journey. The fundraising campaign behind the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the most successful in this country's history. It's completely unprecedented and amongst other national museums, and that is the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I know that I was there, and many of you in the room were there when they announced in October that they'd raised $130 million in private capital. And I think what's important always to remind all of us in the room is, yes, a large part of that came from Manitoba, and wasn't an interesting editor or an article today in the Winnipeg Free Press about Manitoba. But that money came in across Canada, and it's come in internationally. It's that kind of support that is driving the entrepreneurial spirit of what makes this museum right. And it signals broad public support for the museum and renewed fundraising momentum. From the early and ongoing leadership of Gail Asper, together with Mo Levy, to the Friends' new CEO, Dav Sitkovich, who will continue to grow Friends' fundraising efforts across Canada and, of course, internationally. It makes us more committed than ever to achieving our shared vision for the museum, and we are thrilled at the prospect of this continued collaboration. But we must ensure that we strive to stretch every dollar as far as we can and make every dollar count. No one said this would be easy. As some of the earliest supporters of this project, federal, provincial, municipal, private sector partners have reminded me, if we'd quit when things got tough, if we'd put down our tools, we'd never put the first shovel in the ground. But we did. And that picture, that one picture of Gail Asper, our chairman, Arnie Thorstenson, the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, the Premier at that time, Gary Doer. I gave him that day off in those days, just so you know, to go do that. And representing our Mayor, Justin Swandell, the leadership that that picture embodies is something that motivates each and every one of us in the days that we walk through our doors of this museum, because that vision is something that we all build on every day. And it would have been easy just to say no. As a matter of fact, when the Globe and Mail asked the question, should this museum be built, the answer is aloud from Canadians, absolutely, and Winnipeg is the right place for it. So over the past year in particular, we've synchronized these steps with partnerships that we've forged with Canadians. And it gives me considerable pride as CEO that we are taking the time to speak directly with Canadians about this project, not only to ask for their feedback and their guidance, but to then invest the time and resources to incorporate that feedback into our work. Without question, it's been collaboration and consultation that best characterizes our most significant achievements from the past year. I don't think that any of us in a leadership position at the CMHR can overestimate the critical importance that working to build trust has had in the process of developing this project. When we talk about human rights, we're talking about issues that are uniquely personal. The issues around rights touch the deepest roots of our identity, how we're seen, who we are. Quite often, these are phenomenally raw, very emotionally, very challenging issues. The very fragility of the subject matter suggests that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights will never be free from controversy, and we accept this. But merely accepting the reality of controversy would be the easy way out. The more challenging task is to work in good faith to build trust, to nourish and maintain a dialogue with Canadians of every background. And I am proud of the effort our staff has invested in this regard over the past year. Some of you may have seen in the Winnipeg Free Press story from last Sunday about the partnership the museum has worked to build with the Chinese Canadian community. In my view, This was a helpful snapshot of the work of the team has done with a myriad of groups and individuals over the past 12 months. The work continues, but I'm very proud that I can today report that our public engagement efforts have now grown to include more than 3,000 Canadians, 3,000 individual Canadians from every background and from every corner of Canada. Yes, this is a significant investment of time, but the benefits are clear. Our researchers have been a very deliberate focus on what they call participatory research. In fact, they bring very special expertise in this area. Is this approach the fastest way to build a museum? Not by a long shot. Is it the right way? To grow and nourish a conversation with the aim of dissolving barriers and building trust? We think it is. We are trying quite deliberately to raise the bar with regard to the way that we approach research. Our researchers are working to make what was once almost universally regarded as a purely academic exercise, allowing it to instead to become a community exercise with our futures visitors' experience at the forefront. It is a significant accomplishment that the researchers and curators on our staff have made inclusion and equality of representation their watchwords. They're insistent, I should say, on doing things differently. They're committed to doing more, and their efforts are a significant achievement of the past year that deserves acknowledgement. So it is with initiatives like our Oral Histories project, which Heather will speak about in detail in a few minutes. And as people like Heather could tell you, there are much more expedient ways to collect first-person points of view without an exhaustive project like these oral histories. But our people were insistent that to do justice to lived experience of these individuals, to preserve the integrity, the impact of their stories, the stories had to be captured and then conveyed in the original voice. Our researchers, again, insisted on meeting a higher standard. They didn't want, for example, simply to try and replicate the tradition of Indigenous First Persons accounts. They wanted the power and impact of the real thing. There's a parallel with the museum's commitment to accessibility. Was it enough to ensure that building was accessible? Ramps instead of stairs, barrier-free access to exhibits, and so forth? Our digital media team didn't think so. So they were insistent that accessibility had to mean something much broader. For them, it meant that an individual with an impaired vision could interact with an exhibit, that a person with a seated mobility device could interact with an exhibit, that a person with motor challenge could interact with an exhibit, that a person using adaptive technology from home can access our digital content. And I should note, too, that we're not waiting until the museum is fully operational to start implementing this stuff. We're doing it right now. We're already making every effort we can to make each of our offerings as inclusive as we can make it. And so we've now formed something we call the Inclusive Design Advisory Council. And Valerie, you're here with us today, which you'll hear about in detail in a few minutes, and a national testing group which ensures that nearly everything we offer digitally is first tested by Canadians living with a disability who use an adaptive technology to access digital content. This marks a significant achievement of the past year. It's my hope that this inclusive approach helps set a higher standard for all public institutions when it comes to accessible content and programming. Perhaps the most significant aspect of our mandate, and an area we've made great strides over the past 12 months, is around education. We have a commitment to incorporate more human rights learning to support school curriculum. But how do you go about doing that? In our view, you go to the community. You partner with teachers, ministers of education, some of Canada's leading educational thinkers. Over the past year, that's what our team has done. We have an exceptionally talented staff, but the experts on age-appropriate learning and balanced curriculum development are the people that are already on the front lines of public education in our country. The integrated partnerships between the CMHR and educators will, we believe, be a model that will ensure that our education programs are relevant, that they're accessible, and easily integrated into the classroom. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights will be an extension of the classroom. But the approach to learning marks a full fundamental departure from the typical school field trip to a museum. We now have in place a Director of Learning and Programming. That's a full-time role, and it's indicative of a fundamentally different philosophy when it comes to the formal role public education has in our work. If, for example, you're a parent, you're an educator, you know that kids get it. They have the right instincts when it comes to breaking down barriers and embracing the inherent equality of all people. Our job is to support them, to cultivate those instincts, to encourage them to think freely about these weighty issues, and to help them, to inspire their peers to take a stand for human rights. It's thanks to burgeoning relations with ministers of education across the country, in particular with the leadership of Manitoba's own Deputy Minister and Minister of Education, with national organizations such as the Canadian Teachers Federation, with school trustees, educators, and with students themselves, that we believe we're on the right track. Building these relationships has been a key focus over the past year, and we'll build on this work over the coming year too. Our educational partnerships are, of course, not limited to those in the early, middle, and senior years. Over the past year, the museum has built on our formal relations with universities. 4 members of our team delivered lectures as part of the Human Rights Speakers Series organized by the University of Manitoba. We have a growing partnership with the Global College and the University of Winnipeg. I know some students are in the back. We're including collaborating in an intensive 2-week, 6-credit-hour course over the summer. While we will be moving as well to formalizing our partnership with the Université de Saint-Boniface and Red River College, we have already been able to identify some key initiatives. We're initiating partnerships with Ryerson University in Toronto, the Ontario College of Art and Design, and post-secondary institutions in Quebec. And these relationships will continue to grow. Our MOU with Rotary International will help bring thousands of students from across the country and around the world to experience the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I'm not sure if David Newman is here or not, but he's one of the leaders in this program. You certainly need to acknowledge him. On top of this, we continue to build our research capacity with an aim to becoming a recognized destination for human rights research, not only here in Canada, but around the globe. And I hope you'll excuse me if I again mention that these international researchers will be investing considerable dollars in our local economy while they're here. All of these efforts have become a vital part of our journey as an organization. Canadians have insisted, rightly so, on the highest standards, and we are working each day to meet them. Good enough is not good enough for the museum. If it were, I could stand here today and tell you that our public consultation had concluded. I could tell you that time for revision and refinement was over. I could give you the specific time and date that we would open our doors. But Canadians expect more from their Human Rights Museum. They told us to continue to listen, to give shape to our exhibits in a way that reflects what they've told us. They expect us to build on the dialogue that we've forged with so many communities across this great nation. They want us to spend the time to get this right. Nous allons prendre le temps nécessaire pour bien faire.
We will take the time necessary to do things right.
It is far from over, but we continue to move in the right direction. As you might know, when we released our annual report over the summer called Change Takes Shape. Put another way, we wanted to make clear to Canadians that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights wasn't only going to become a place that would affect positive change in Canada, but to reinforce that the museum was already beginning to make good on that mandate. After you hear from our next few speakers, I think you'll agree that we're getting there, that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is already forging a new path toward a more equal, more empathetic, more active, and more humane Canada. Canada that can set a higher standard for the world. But whatever you think, please continue to be part of this project. Challenge us, encourage us, partner with us. Ask questions, help find solutions, be generous with your advice. Whenever I have the opportunity to address an audience in my capacity as CEO, I like to remind people that human rights are not like politics. It's not enough to have the many represented by the few. No, the advancement of human rights demands the commitment of all of us. Nous devons tous nous engager.
We have to commit ourselves to the promotion of human rights.
Museum for Human Rights represents the best opportunity our country has ever had to build a Canada that truly reflects our highest ideals. And we will, if we continue together along this path of investing all we can to get it right. Pour Winnipeg, Manitoba.
For Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and the world.
Thank you, Stuart. Merci, Stuart.
Merci, Stuart.
It's my pleasure to present a walkthrough of where we are in terms of our content today. One of the fortunate things that I've been able to do through my role with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is to be part of our public engagement efforts. And both our first cross-Canada story gathering process, our second smaller process last fall where we met with a number of Canadians across the country to provide them with drafts of our work and input their feedback. And now it's as part of this iterative process, I'd like to present a little bit as to where we are today. I'd like to just underscore that everything that we do is guided by our official mandate, and that is to explore the subject of human rights with special but not exclusive reference to Canada in order to enhance the public's understanding of human rights, to promote respect for others, and to encourage reflection and dialogue. And these are certainly our guiding principles as we move forward with the development of our content. Another element that informs our process as we're developing this content that will be ever-changing, dynamic, woven, and in awe-inspiring spaces is that we have the privilege of working with some of the best in the world, including master exhibit designers Ralph Applebaum Associates. But we cannot forget that Canada's national and international contributions to human rights, as well as the dark chapters in Canada's history, must be and will be told in vivid and inspiring ways. We're going to challenge our visitors to confront issues such as discrimination and exclusion, and will be inspired to take action ultimately to create a more inclusive and respectful world. And through the use of state-of-the-art technology, interactive exhibits, storytelling, theater, artifacts, and art, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights will offer something unique and different with each visit. At its core, it means taking opportunities for learning and then building in opportunities for dialogue. What I'll be presenting this afternoon is a really high-level overview, and in some cases, what we will present are working renderings of a number of our spaces. These are meant to give you a better sense of our process moving forward, as well as what it represents to develop this journey. Now, we're not going to focus a lot on the physical building, but I did want to point to the ramps. We've talked a lot about the ramps, but how do these ramps ultimately guide a visitor through the journey? What's important to note with the ramps is that the journey is not necessarily sequential, in that you would leave one gallery never to see it again and continue forward on your journey. The ramps actually challenge you to come back and revisit spaces, sometimes from a different perspective, sometimes from a different view, informed by the content that you had seen at an earlier part of your journey. And it's meant to interweave and interconnect a lot of the human rights stories that we're telling. So while the architecture is significant and certainly embodies a lot of the metaphors around human rights, today we'd like to really focus on the elements of our content. A few elements include our classroom spaces. While we won't go into detail about developing programming at this point, there's an image on the screen right now of the classroom spaces. This features 3 classrooms. They can also be expanded. And this is where students will be dropped off to be able to do pre-course work, organize a little bit, move into the gallery spaces, and then come back perhaps for more programming. This allows us to ensure that whether they are in early, middle, or senior years, a visit can be tailored and ensure that it is age appropriate. I'd like to speak a little bit first to our process, our research process. So how is this being done? Well, we've received input and it's been provided by many sources. This includes the work of our internal research and curation team. We've consulted broadly with external experts in the field of human rights. We've looked at primary and secondary sources. We've been informed by our public engagement efforts. We've referred to the recommendations in the Content Advisory Committee report. We've continued to consult directly with communities and individuals. We've been informed through our oral history interviews. We've engaged with a wide variety of stakeholders, and we also are in discussion within our own team and as well with management and with our Board of Trustees. So these are all of the players that come together as we begin to define and refine our process. So you take that research and then you begin to develop an exhibit. And you continue to consult and you continue to engage. And you continue to do research. You begin to develop an approach. What we've referred to as an approach to each gallery is a framing of each gallery. And these approaches help us remind us of what the learning objectives are for each gallery, what our aspirations are vis-a-vis visitor experience, and what are some of the key messages that we want to convey within the gallery. We certainly have internal review process, but we've also been engaging academics and experts from outside of the museum to give us critiques on our approaches and to review them. This is not a peer review process for those who are more familiar with an academic blind peer review process. It is something that we've forged and developed in our particular circumstance to ensure that we're hearing that input as we're framing the galleries. And then ultimately we move into exhibition design. But much like the journey through the museum, this is not linear. It is a process that is ongoing and continuous. And sometimes what happens, and the team will know, you think you're getting closer to landing, and something comes in that informs your approach, improves your approach, and allows us to reach higher. So the following images on the screen present some of the different facets or elements that we use in the development of our inaugural exhibition program. We use floor plans. How is the space set up? How will people move through the space? And Corey will speak briefly in terms of inclusive design and accessibility, but certainly we want the spaces to be used by a wide range of audiences, that people are comfortable, they have places to sit, but also that we pace them through a journey. What you see in the middle is an image of a rendering of a space, and you'll see that there are no images or photographs in those particular areas. And that's because part of the work that we need to do to get to this final rendering in the corner is identify those images, ensure that we have the copyrights to those images, and develop text panels and other material to start telling the stories behind those images. So certainly these are important to be able to convey the work of the museum and to demonstrate how the spaces may feel. But I just note today that these are still working documents, and we are in the midst of doing a lot of that image research to finalize which particular images and stories we'll be telling through the museum. So the journey through the museum will begin in Buehler Hall. And at that point, you'll be presented with a welcome not only to the territory. We are located on Treaty 1 territory. We are right across the river from historic St. Boniface. We are home to the Métis Nation, and all of those elements inform us, including the wide range of immigrants who moved through this space, either through the railway or through other places. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights is situated on a meeting place, and we want to recognize and honor that tradition and continue to forge that relationship with all visitors who come to this place. From this introductory gallery, we'll be moving into a gallery that's provisionally called Introduction to Human Rights. And I say provisionally because these are still working titles, but it starts to give you a sense of how we're framing these galleries. This particular gallery will be painting a broad vision of human rights to help our visitors appreciate what we mean when we talk about looking at the world through a human rights lens. This gallery will set up the rest of the journey through the museum, and we will include in here a human rights timeline that will feature seminal events like the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and granting the vote to women in Canada. So that points to both the international elements of the timeline as well as ones that are distinctly Canadian. The next section of the museum deals with Canada's human rights history. This part is made up of a cluster of 3 galleries. The first gallery begins to look at Indigenous rights, and it's intended to convey Indigenous concepts of humanity and how Indigenous peoples struggle for and assert their rights in Canada. And that is a message we consistently have heard as we went across the country, that these stories must be part of this museum. But I just want to note that this is not the only area where there will be Indigenous content, and those stories will be woven throughout the museum. Next comes Canada's human rights journey. This particular gallery is focused on historical incidents of rights violation in Canada, as well as the struggle to achieve rights for those who have had them denied, and ultimately the achievement of those rights. This gallery will allow us to focus on stories such as the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act, the Kamagata Maru, and Canada's internment operations, to provide but a few examples. And finally, the Canadian Challenge. This will examine the current state of human rights law and legal instruments in Canada, as well as the limits to these rights. This gallery will help our visitors learn about how their rights are protected in Canada, how to claim them, and how to prevent further violations. And it will also look at Canada's sources of law, including the British common law, civil law, and Indigenous legal traditions. Now, for those of you who are not interested in law, it's also important to note that this particular gallery is being developed so that it is particularly engaging for young people. And so there's a high level and a high degree of interactivity. So it's not just a question of having these laws on a wall, but encouraging and challenging people to reflect and have conversations about these instruments and what does it mean and how does it impact on their individual lives. And that means looking at individual challenges. So that is challenges that are brought by individuals or group challenges. We want to demonstrate that people can mobilize, they can organize, and they can assert their rights. So moving then from what we refer to as this suite of galleries, we move into the third another cluster of 3 galleries. And this is the section that focuses on international human rights history. It begins with the gallery provisionally entitled Examining the Holocaust. It serves as a case study to explore how a modern democratic society collapsed into genocide, and also explores the stages of genocide as studied by Raphael Lemkin. We will feature an introductory film that examines Canada and the Holocaust. And some of our early research has found newspaper clippings and articles in a time that Canada was being followed and tracked, and in particular, the reserve system that we had developed was beginning to be seen as a model. And it's not to minimize or equivocate, but we certainly need to be aware of our history here in Canada as well. There'll be a thematic approach within the gallery, examining state power, spreading of fear and hatred, examining war and genocide, and in particular, Lemkin's stages allow us to explore a number of other genocides, including the Armenian genocide and the Holodomor. Moving from there is our gallery provisionally entitled Hope and Hard Work, or Hard Work and Hope, depending on the kind of day you're having, or I'm having rather. Looking at the drafting and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, It will explore how this document was developed and the numerous declarations and covenants that have followed in the footsteps of the UDHR. We will also be looking here at social movements. So these movements are made up of committed and passionate individuals who have worked to bring these declarations, such as the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, the Declaration of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as 3 examples, to life. Connected to this gallery is the gallery provisionally called Breaking the Silence. This examines 20 other incidents of gross large-scale human rights violations and will feature prominently the 5 genocides officially recognized by Canada. These include the Holodomor, referred to often as the Ukrainian famine, Rwanda, Srebrenica, the Holocaust, and the Armenian genocide. Included in this space will be a large recognition wall, an exhibit on each of the 5 genocides recognized by Canada, a study table to demonstrate and provide access to evidence, and study carrels for more quiet study and reflection. We really conceive the Breaking in the Silence and the Hope and Hard Work galleries as one unified space, and looking at either of them in isolation would be inaccurate. We believe that people will go back and forth between these 2 spaces to see how the treatment of the Genocide Convention in Hope and Hard Work refers and relates to some of the genocides that Canada has recognized, for example. In addition, we expect that once people hear a little bit more of these large, gross violations, they will return to the examining the Holocaust gallery and begin to see these links and connections. We're really examining here visitor impact, and we're also developing quite a bit of content workshops that have allowed us to point to the power of these spaces. Now from here, we begin to transition into the more contemporary. And certainly, the last sections of the museum are going to be devoted to current human rights issues, and there are 4 galleries that make up this section. First is the Forum. This is designed to be a participatory space for dialogue and discussion on peace and human rights. It will focus on notions of action that are crucial to the protection, promotion, and achievement of human rights, including creativity, empowerment, dialogue, and relationship building. Around the world, individuals and communities are working to repair and transform their lives and the lives of their communities in the face of human rights abuses. We want to have our visitors here discover the initiatives worldwide that are repairing and transforming our communities, including our own Truth and Reconciliation process here in Canada. How do you build sustainable peace? And how do you provide an environment in which human rights and dignity can flourish? So we're going to think creatively and critically and with empathy about the connection both between peace and human rights in the face of gross large-scale violations, armed conflict, or structural violence. And ultimately, this begins to speak to taking action. We want to recognize and nourish the various skills necessary for building a human rights community and a sustainable peace. From there, we move into human rights today. This gallery is focused on current issues and emerging human rights trends, and they're going to convey the immovable notion that the struggle for human rights is ever-pressing and ongoing around the world. This gallery will feature the stories of human rights defenders, people who are working for human rights around the world. And we will, for inauguration, begin to examine the topic of poverty. And poverty is indeed a complex issue. And we want to take care to guide our visitors into the idea of poverty as a violation of human rights and as an impediment to the full enjoyment of human rights. For this, we're fortunate to be able to rely on a number of international human rights treaties and norms to provide definitions and understandings that have been in common usage in human rights forums since the mid-20th century, establishing notably the rights to adequate standard of living, food, shelter, education, health, development, and gender equality. These highlight the interrelatedness, indivisibility, and interdependence of human rights. And poverty in particular is measurably one of the most cross-cutting issues and touches on gender issues, child issues, and key human rights issues. From there, we move into a space that we refer to as Eye on the World. This is a space that will transition more frequently once the museum's doors are open, as it allows us to use photojournalism and documentary film to explore human rights issues. And this allows us to create a space and a place where we can mark anniversaries, hold fora, discussions, and it will be a dynamic, ever-changing place. And finally, last but not least, a gallery that's provisionally entitled Take Action. This really provides the nuts and bolts of activism, empowerment, and personal agency. It's here that we explore how we each can make a difference in building and nourishing a human rights culture, whether it's signing a petition, volunteering your time, starting a nonprofit organization. We can all take steps for human rights. We just have a photo there of some of our staff who are participating in We Day. This is an example of one of those galleries that's in full development, but ultimately this is also a space that will be staffed by personnel in the museum that will help you to begin to pathfind actions for human rights. And this is really taking inspiration from a quote by Miriam Wright Edelman. A lot of people are waiting for Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi to come back, but they are gone. We are it. It is up to us. It is up to you. That is the last official gallery of the museum. From there, visitors can take a trip to the Tower of Hope and the culmination of this journey from darkness to light, from despair to hope. They'll be treated to a spectacular view of Winnipeg and look upon a landscape where many human rights struggles have been fought and won. And from there, and from the beginning, we've recognized that for many of our visitors, the human rights journey at the museum will be a challenging and emotional one. And we want to respect and dignify that, so there are quiet spaces throughout the museum designed to offer a space for quiet reflection, and one such space is the Stuart Clark Garden of Contemplation. And so that provides a high-level overview of our inaugural exhibits and the work that we've done to date. And I thank you for your time. I'd like to now introduce Heather Budzinski, who is the head of collections at the museum. She holds a master's degree in archival studies from the University of Manitoba and has worked in a number of archival settings, including the Hudson Bay Company's archives, Archives of Manitoba, and Nova Scotia Archives. She is responsible for the development and management of the museum's collections and is the co-lead of the oral history program. Please join me in welcoming Heather Budzinski.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here today to take part in the first annual public meeting of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights.
It has been happening behind the scenes, so I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing with oral history at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I thought I'd begin by sharing a little bit of the process with you. In preparation for an oral history, our researchers conduct significant research in preparation, perhaps not as visually stimulating as the studio setup, so the video you're watching is actually high-speed footage of the preparation required to set up our traveling studio. It requires an immense amount of work, including moving furniture, setting up backdrops, steaming the backdrops, setting up lights, adjusting the lights, and testing the equipment. That's before our interviewee even steps foot through the door. In real time, this process can take hours to complete, but through the magic of video editing, in under a minute, we can see just how much work goes into the preliminary process. Oral history is a way of gathering and preserving historical information by interviewing people who have lived through past events. It is the systemic collection of living people's testimony about their own experiences in order to gain a more comprehensive and personal view of the past. Oral history is an important instrument for research, for collection development, and for the preservation and sharing of human rights experiences. The images you see behind me are photographs from some of our oral history program. These are people that have taken the time to share their experience, their knowledge, and their inspiring stories. These are the faces of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights Oral History Program. Oral history is a critical source for research that offers something that other sources lack: perspectives from groups and individuals who are often marginalized. These are people whose stories have not otherwise been preserved in the historical record. Perhaps one of the greatest strengths of oral history, and indeed this is what makes it crucial to fulfilling the museum's mandate for inclusivity. Oral history is of tremendous value to researchers. It gives them the opportunity to engage in active dialogue with their sources. It offers them access to information that might otherwise be lost or left undocumented in traditional sources. And it rounds out our perspectives of the past. As a museum dedicated to the exploration of human rights, we face the challenge of presenting a rather abstract concept. The intensely personal and often inspiring stories told through oral history interviews enable us to explore the idea of human rights in a very concrete and tangible way. Oral history will form a significant part of our collections, bringing human rights issues to life, making them personal and meaningful. Oral history fulfills our mission and mandate on multiple levels. It enhances understanding of human rights. It preserves and shares human rights experiences. It fosters original research. It facilitates collection development. And it engages in active dialogues. A robust oral history collection can amplify the voices of underrepresented communities and provide access to stories that have been long absent from history. Oral histories are indispensable in conveying Indigenous content throughout our exhibits by honoring Indigenous worldviews that protect transfer of knowledge through orality and language. The use of oral history and Indigenous languages provides the opportunity for Indigenous concepts of humanities to be expressed with poignancy and precision that cannot be conveyed through written text, through books, or conventional Western academic or colonial-style museums. These considerations make use of oral history absolutely integral to the creation of our exhibits. Museums are increasingly using oral history to provide their visitors with interactive experiences. At the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, we are using oral history to inform exhibit research, for text panels, to enhance programming, and to be the focus or the actual content for some exhibits. Our oral history program began as a one-year pilot project whose goal was to interview a series of 10 to 12 human rights champions, people recognized for their contributions to the advancement of human rights. Careful resource management and an incredible team of dedicated researchers allowed us to complete more than 23 interviews. That was more than double our original projections. We conducted interviews in a number of languages and were able to cover a diverse range of topics, including women's rights, international human rights activism, queer experiences, Indigenous rights, and the experience of persons from a variety of marginalized groups. The resounding success of the pilot project underscores the value of oral history within the museum, not only for research and collection development, but also for relationship building, to garner support, and to raise awareness. I'm pleased to report that we are building on the success of the pilot project, and oral history has evolved into a broader program at the museum, one that seeks to explore human rights experiences, actors, and their actions in a comprehensive and inclusive fashion. This program is based on the concepts of shared authority, ethical research, and community engagement. In just over 14 months of engaging in oral history at the museum, we have accomplished great things. The establishment of a robust oral history program, staff training in oral history procedures, ethics, and trauma, successful completion of the Champions Oral History Pilot Project, completion of research integral to inaugural exhibits, and the sharing of stories through over 80 oral history interviews. We have garnered a great deal of positive feedback and encouragement. Already, the oral history program has established itself as a leader in the broader community. Participants have commented positively on our ethical, participatory, and respectful approach. This has allowed us to build strong relationships with our interviewees and their communities. These are the stories of lived experiences. These are the stories of real people and extraordinary events. These are the stories that will have a profound impact on museum visitors. These are the stories that will make human rights relevant and personal, encourage dialogue, and empower us to change thought and action. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Merci, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. I would like to introduce Corey Timpson, our Director of New Media and Collections.
Design new media and collections initiatives related to and supporting all aspects of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, specifically collections, research, exhibits, and corporate needs. Corey has a BA in law from Carleton University and a postgraduate diploma in interactive multimedia from Algonquin College. Prior to accepting his role at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Corey spent 8 years at the Canadian Heritage Information Network and the Virtual Museum of Canada, where he led the interface and creative design, information architecture, and web management projects. He's authored a number of papers, presentations, and participated at conferences. He is an active collaborator in the new media and digital discourse within the cultural domain. Please join me in welcoming Corey Timpson. Veuillez vous joindre à moi pour accueillir.
Please join me in welcoming Corey Timpson.
And because he uses design, he needs a Mac. So we're just going to flip our laptops briefly. I'm an HP.
We've gotten to hear quite a bit today about some of the things that set our project apart from others, from other museums. And before coming here, you heard a bit from my bio that I had the good fortune of working with a large number of the 3,000 museums that exist in Canada. And a lot of the projects I worked on were related to digital technology and innovation. And this is one of the things that our museum, one of the aspects that may set our museum apart from some of the others as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about digital interaction and the opportunities before us, where we're going and why we're going there. So the museum's often considered an idea museum, and that has to do with our intangible subject matter, something that's a little bit different from other museums. Musée d'idées. When we think about digital technology and the fact that we're an idea museum, we look at our mandate and how we're going to employ digital technology in the museum. I really focus on this little end piece of the mandate to encourage reflection and dialogue. It's very active. Throughout all the speeches you've heard today from Arnie, Stuart, Angela, Heather, you've heard conversation and dialogue. Those two words come up a lot. So when we're thinking about digital technology at the museum, we're thinking about encouraging reflection and dialogue. Favoriser la réflexion et le dialogue.
To encourage reflection and dialogue.
Of digital technology, we think of what we're building. We think of we're an idea museum. It's a concept. It's intangible. We're a national museum. We're based in Winnipeg. And our subject matter is human rights. Human rights are often told through stories. So our collection, unlike a lot of museums, is largely intangible. And you just heard Heather talk about our phenomenal oral history program, which is born digital. It starts off immaterial, which is a different proposition than a lot of other museums. Not to say we won't have artifacts, of course we will. But our collection definitely takes on a different shape when you consider the collections of other museums. And what are we going to do with that collection to fulfill our mandate? When we think of digital interactivity, a lot of people think of something like this or think of an iPhone. Is this interactive? This is someone who's pushing a button to read a text, watch a video, look at an image. Those are all passive activities. Interactivity means something a little bit more to us. I love this photo. When we think of the Idea Museum, I think of an experience and interaction designer, Nathan Shedroff, and I've been saying this quote of his for years. In 2000, he published a book called Experience Design, and in this book, he said, one of the most interactive experiences you'll have in your life is a great conversation. So when we think about digital technology, and we think about the experience we want to offer people, we think of this quote, and we think that if we can provide a dialogue, maybe we're a dialogue museum. Dialogues are reciprocal, they're multi-directional, they're back and forth, there's cause and effect, action, reaction. This is interactivity. So, in many museums, visitors come to the museum and are informed by the museum. And we want to do that. We want visitors to visit our museum and be informed by the museum. But we also want visitors to come to the museum and inform us. And we want visitors to come to the museum and inform one another. This is the dialogue. And then the role of digital technology, of social and mobile media, of the web, is to facilitate this dialogue. Not just to push a button to read, watch, and listen. This is an image of Facebook connections. And we can use that as an example of the type of approach we're taking to all the digital media and digital technology that we're putting in gallery and using for remote visitors. We want to facilitate content delivery and storytelling. We want to facilitate the dialogue, and we want to build interactivity and engagement with multiple audiences, irrespective of where they are. The brighter lights on this map show the stronger connections and the more numerous connections. And people use Facebook so they can share stories, share media, and connect with their friends. They can engage in a dialogue. So it's a really great example of the approach that we're taking. So our goal of using digital technology is to facilitate the dialogue, to build interactivity and engagement, and this means in our exhibits, that was my funny slide and I spoiled it. Our exhibits on the website, through the web, through social media and mobile media, in our reference center, our library, through collaborative projects with others, and in our programming in gallery and out of gallery. Our goal, keeping in mind, no matter what we do with digital technology, is to facilitate this dialogue. One of the issues with technology is this photo, amazingly, was not taken that long ago, and no one is wanting one of these computers for Christmas. As much as technology is an amazing facilitator and gives us enormous opportunity, it can also be a barrier. So we have to figure out how to take advantage of technology and all that it offers us, yet somehow remain technology agnostic. And I think music is a really good example of content. And this is the approach we'll take with all of our content. Music was pressed into vinyl, put on an 8-track. Then we went to cassette, CD, and now I was trying to think of how do we represent music today, and the only thing I could think to do is put a little play button in the corner, because music isn't tied into the physical form anymore. Music exists in its intangible nature and can be expressed through any form based on the needs of the person listening to the music, the user. So this is how we want to take our approach for media and technology in gallery and online. We want to separate our stories from the form that they're taking. And we want to do this so that we can produce our content once and then send it out to wherever we need it to go, be it a home computer, a mobile device, a tablet, or a display in gallery. So this is just some examples. In gallery, at home, on a mobile. This is the type of flexibility we want so that when whatever comes next, we can address that as well. This is an image of a woman wearing Nokia's augmented reality glasses. These exist, and they're glasses that allow a user to, through retina tracking, navigate their email, surf the web, and they view it through the glasses. Will these become mainstream technology? Maybe not, but the point is if we follow the music example, which is what we're doing, then we'll be able to produce our content and send it here in a cost-effective way. We won't have to reproduce the work that we've done. This is a huge fundamental shift from how other museums are operating, and it's an advantage we have from being built with no legacy today. We're really talking about being ubiquitous. We want to share our content and stories without constraints. So we can produce content once and use it often. That means using it in different scenarios. We heard a lot of talk already today about the virtual visitors, people who are following us online, people who may not have the opportunity to come to Winnipeg. We can present our content to different audiences in different ways. And we can evolve and change over time in perpetuity in a cost-effective way. So unlike this bookshelf, we'll never fill up, but we can continue to add. So growing for the future and meeting the expectations of visitors are two very large goals, but doing it accessibly. Irrespective of location, of constraints, like conceptual constraints or physical barriers, or irrespective of ability. Angela spoke a little bit earlier, and so did Stuart, about inclusive design and the formation of our Inclusive Design Advisory Council. I should note that this council and our approach is not just to be inclusively designed in regards to digital media, but this is a very clear example of where we can make a difference. The difference between inclusive design and accessibility is with accessibility often is something has been built or designed and you figure out how to make it accessible. And we want to make sure that we weave into the business practice of the museum a methodology which employs inclusive and universal design, where from the very outset we're designing a solution, be it an in-gallery experience or the presentation of digital content online, be it a policy we're writing for how we're a human resources policy, for example. We want to ensure that we're designing these things inclusively from the outset to appeal to everyone. And then we're going to need some help along the way, and that's where the Inclusive Design Advisory Council comes in. It's fairly straightforward to make content accessible. There are guidelines, the WCAG 2.0 AAA compliance. We can follow that and know that someone with a screen reader can read our content. But how do we make an experience accessible? We saw a rendering of some of the in-gallery presentation, and in Canada's Human Rights Journey, we have a large canvas of images that are 8 feet wide by 8 feet tall. There's 2 layers of images stacked above one another. That's going to create quite a visual experience when someone walks into that gallery. I get goosebumps thinking about it already. But how do we make that experience accessible to someone who can't see? We don't want to just describe it. We want to be able to do more where we can. So one thing we started this year was the Inclusive Design Advisory Council. We've got 8 members in this council. Some of them are in the audience right now. 4 from Winnipeg, 2 from Quebec, 2 from Ontario. And there are a variety of experts with both Anglophone and Francophone. And they provide us advice where we need advice, using their networks to help inform the decisions that we're making. We also have the Digital Media National Test Group. This is 30 members across the country who test our products before we put them online. Again, using a variety of adaptive technologies and Anglophone, Francophone members, helping ensure that before we post something online that we vetted it. Not that it's just it meets a standard or it meets a code, but that it's actually usable in the most effective way. And we've started working with the Ontario College of Art and Design's Inclusive Design Research Centre. For some of our in-gallery media and technology, we're breaking new ground. How does someone with a mobility impairment or a vision impairment use a touchscreen? We said we want to take advantage of media and technology to facilitate a dialogue, but that means that we have to address this from an inclusive perspective at the outset. And the IDRC is helping us test, vet, and prove the design solutions that we're coming up with. So overall, I guess our goal of digital technology is to not experience what happened to me at the very beginning of this talk, but also is to facilitate dialogue, to deliver content and stories in efficient, scalable, cost-effective ways, reducing constraints and avoiding barriers for when we're open, but in perpetuity. Thanks. Sorry again about the thing at the beginning.
Okay, well, we're going to move into the question and answer period. We'll be now proceeding, as stated earlier, we've allotted 15 minutes to answer questions. We will also be accepting questions from our remote audiences via the web. We've had a number of people at the back of the room tracking both Twitter and other blogs and Facebook. And we've also been emailed a number of questions from people who were unable to attend in person. So what we will try to do is rotate a question from someone who is in the room and then or rotate back and forth in terms of virtual questions versus questions in the room. And just note that if you don't get an opportunity to ask your question today, please feel free to provide it either through Facebook, Twitter, or email account, our website, or ask one of the staff personnel today. We will be posting a complete frequently asked questions document to address all of the questions that we've received both online and in person. And so I just wanted to flag that we have Lise and Lindsay at the front of the room with their mic. If you'd like to pose a question, please signal to them. And what we'd like to begin doing is just one of the questions that was emailed today. So perhaps if you would like to ask the first in-person question, wave to Lise here, and then we'll proceed with that question following this one here. So we received an email from Joanne, and she has two concerns regarding how accessible the museum will be for people with mobility disabilities. And she states that she has rheumatoid arthritis and has difficulty getting up off low seats. Is there a consideration to make the washrooms accessible to people who have arthritis at a height of 18 inches? Will there be benches, chairs available for people to rest at a comfortable height of 18 inches and not slanted? Will the museum be accessible for people with arthritis? So thank you, Joanne, for your question, and perhaps Corey, you can speak to that.
Yes. There's a lot of code that goes into that, and one of the things about a universal design approach is to recognize that making things universally designed and aesthetically beautiful, those are not diametrically opposed. Those can both happen. So we're working with our exhibit designers all the time to ensure that the designs they're producing for in-gallery, things like incidental seating, which will be available everywhere through in-gallery, as well as non-gallery spaces, are completely code-based. But then this is something that we've worked into all of our production schedules, is rigorous prototyping and testing opportunities. So it's the type of thing that when we know something meets code, we won't just stop there. We'll test it and prove it out, just sort of like what I spoke about with the IDRC at the Ontario College of Art and Design. But yes, all of our seating, all of our provisions will be made for anyone with any type of mobility impairment or someone who has arthritis. Benches will have backs and arms and all of those things, and then we'll actually test the ergonomics to make sure that they work as good as they possibly can.
Thank you. Next, we'll take a question from the floor.
Hi, my name is Asta Pawaleszka. I would like to ask Heather, where that fellow who set up that portable oral history setup, is he paid by the hour or is he paid by the job?
She.
No, really. This is an absolutely unbelievable project. It is truly extraordinary, and I really think that all of us and all of Winnipeg and all of Canada should really be thankful to the vision of Izzy Asper and to his heir, who happened to pick up the torch and run with it. That's Gail Asper. Okay. Without any doubt, everybody supports the museum. I'm very proud that from the very beginning, when I first heard of it, I actually wrote the first letter to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress supporting this museum. However, in order for it to be successful and to avoid any misunderstandings and miscomprehensions and animosities that may result, I just wonder if Stuart Murray, being in charge of the operation, could answer me, how did you concretely address some of these concerns that were raised specifically by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress regarding the, shall we call it, at the time, it may have changed now, of the possibly too much concentration on the Holocaust vis-a-vis other tragedies of the world. That's all.
Thank you very much for the question. And one of the things that we have done, I think we talked about, was the importance of engaging communities. And certainly we have worked very closely with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress to ensure them that we're listening very carefully to what they say. We have had numerous meetings with them as well as the UCCLA, and that dialogue will continue. It's not a matter of sitting down with a community once and saying, look, you know, let's agree to either disagree or move on. We respect the fact that the Canadian government has recognized the Holodomor as a genocide, and so we want to treat it with the appropriate way in the museum, and which is going to be in a permanent way. And I think that sometimes in our dialogue that we get a sense when these tragedies are being discussed with many communities, they get a sense that they talk about the number of unfortunate people that suffered in these genocides. And we've tried to be very clear with all communities we talk about that we're not a genocide museum, that we're really a human rights museum in the sense of how we're looking at some of these issues. And it is not easy, and I respect the question, and thank you for even raising it. It's not an easy task, but because it is not my museum, because it is involving so many people from the community, and we engage, and we go back and we engage some more, that we believe at the end of the day that we're going to be successful, because it's not just about one story. And I think that one of the areas that Corey has touched on, which I think is so important for all to understand, because this is an idea museum, because there's some changes, it doesn't change the fact that something's going to be temporary. What it does give us the opportunity is to go deeper and deeper and deeper into various content. And I'll be specific for 1 second just to address the Holodomor. One of the areas that we've dealt with the UCC is to establish a bit of a relationship with the Holodomor Museum in Kiev. And we're going to be looking at exchanging stories, artifacts, and creating opportunities, and always reminding people in the gallery and people that are listening virtually that one of the key areas that we have in the museum that we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about is our temporary exhibit area. So we have opportunities to explore issues around the famine that way. So it is an ongoing dialogue. I think that we've worked very hard to try to be respectful. It is a challenge. But I want to just congratulate you for raising the question and also for the way you started. Thank you very much for doing that. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have a question from Twitter. Oh, sorry, okay, sorry, I'm having a hard time reading this. While I'm reading this, can you just find the next person? Yeah. Okay, so question: will you be up? Will you be up for Will you be sorry?
Will you be up for human rights of Canadians today, or just documenting them for historical records?
Speaking of. Okay, sorry, the fold was here. So will you be speaking of up for human rights for Canadians today, or just documenting them from historical records? Yeah, I'll just respond to that, just related to what we talked a little bit about in terms of human rights today. Certainly an objective of the museum is to not be completely historic, but to rather inspire people to consider different topics, to find their own ways to take action, and to demonstrate how other communities have taken action. So we should just underscore that our role is ultimately to educate. We are not a news outlet. And so certainly when we look at contemporary issues, we want to find a way to ensure that we're timely and relevant, but there are certain challenges doing that in a museum context as well. So certainly inspiring people to take action, pointing them to ways that they can take that action, and that's how we'll help to equip and inspire and educate Canadians in terms of how to speak up for contemporary human rights issues. Okay. Do we have another question from the floor?
Yeah, hi. During the course of 2008 and 2009, there was an archaeological excavation that took place at the footprint of the Forks. So far, the report for that has yet to be published. It's now 2011. That was the initial work was done in 2008. The work was finished in 2010, in May of 2010, and it was published. It was given out. I'm one of the people that wrote it. It's now been over a year, and there's no publication of this, which I should start off by saying I do strongly support this museum, and I think it's a fantastic idea. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there were some things that went on during that excavation that lead to some pretty strong questions, to the point that the recommendations page, and this is what my question is going to be about. I just did this so you guys can see it. Basically says, at this time there is no point in writing several paragraphs of recommendations for the Canadian Museum for Human Rights site. The organizations involved in the construction of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights have demonstrated that they will not be bound by the terms of the heritage permits. Recommendations for reasonable heritage resource management practices were ignored during and after the mitigative excavation project. More of the same would be as futile as King Canute raving at the waves. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. I worked, as I said, from the very beginning of those excavations until the end, and I know the gentleman that wrote this. He actually retired as soon as he finished working for the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. And my questions are, number one, why has that report not been given out to anybody? This is information that should be free. And number two, what do you think of the fact that the person that was hired said that you did your best to get around the heritage permits and that making any recommendations would be unbelievably futile?
Thank you for your question. First and foremost, just to clarify, that certainly while the first architect completed his work in 2010, archaeologist, pardon me, the work continued actually into 2011. Yeah, and so the work was actually completed in spring and summer of this current year, and so we're waiting for a complete body of reports to really demonstrate the scope of the work that was done throughout 2008 to 2011, because that provides the fullest picture of the work that was done. As to your question in terms of the Manitoba Heritage Resources Branch, we worked with them throughout the process, and can I please finish responding? Thank you. I just want to be clear that we have worked with the Manitoba Heritage Resources Branch from the beginning, and we were following Manitoba's legislative requirements in terms of heritage resources management. And so certainly, if you'd like to have a conversation in terms of particular elements of the report, we can have a conversation, but that would also need to involve the Manitoba Heritage Resources Branch, who guided and supported us and worked with the museum closely to ensure that we met the terms and requirements as per the legislation. So if that helps, we can certainly bring and involve Manitoba Heritage Resources Branch to better understand both what the legislation required and how we worked to meet those standards. Pardon me?
I said, well, thank you for your answer.
Yeah. No, and certainly if you would like to stay behind, we can get your contact information to schedule a meeting to review. Okay.
Angela, over here.
Do we have any other questions from online?
Or not online, but in person?
In person, okay.
Okay, I'm going to be real nervous here. I appreciate the need to study the Holocaust. My deceased husband's family having survived imprisonment before being freed. The reason they were picked up was because my used-to-be father-in-law ran an underground to help a number of people escape and survive before they were all rounded up and brought to Belsen. Just a minute. It's physically demanding for me, sorry.
Yes, no, please take your time.
Thank you. As I said, the study of the Holocaust is very important to me, but I do have a problem with the stewardship in place and pro-offered by this organization. I have read in the Free Press under the article Canvass the Witnesses to History that it is the contention of the board to educate future generations that all human rights flow from the seminal event that was the Holocaust. Just a minute. I also understand that as far as the Human Rights Museum is concerned, I have not seen anything written that is going to not promote, or how can I say, the only information I've seen with the Human Rights Museum is something that disturbs me apart from the last one, and that's that since financial history is not taught from the 1800s anymore, is the museum going to promote the myth that Germans suddenly went crazy when we can look around and see that the financial terror, the financial events that are happening nowadays are very much reflective of past events? Is it the museum's intention to teach our children that all human rights flow from the Holocaust? And that we should, as Indira Gandhi said, promote the fact that all Jews are victims? Do you have a response? Oh, also, what's the capital of Israel?
Well, I'm going to address your first two questions, just recognizing that there are a number of people in the room, and we want to allow time to respond to all of them. First, I just hope that what we were able to present today in terms of a high-level overview of the museum speaks to the foundation of the museum as being a place to encourage and enhance understanding of human rights. And certainly when we look at large gross violations, such as the Holocaust, it is certainly an important example and case study for the museum. But I think that what we hope to demonstrate today and certainly continue to articulate is that when we're providing a broad definition of human rights, it begins not 50 years ago, not 100 years ago, but thousands of years ago. And all of these movements, all of these cultures, all of these perspectives have come to inform how we speak of human rights today. So I hope that begins to respond part of your question.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
No, I asked specifically, are you going to teach that all human rights flow from the Holocaust as written in the Free Press? Are you going to teach that all Germans suddenly went crazy? Is that what you're going to teach our future generations when you make them to go through the museum day after day, year after year?
No, certainly, ma'am, and I thank you for your question, and we're going to move to the next question, but I just want to underscore that the role of the museum is to enhance understanding of human rights, and that our intent is to ensure that we're providing an overview of the various cultural perspectives, social perspectives that have informed this process for the last thousands of years. So certainly I would like to now ask if there's another question, as we only have another 3 minutes in our question period. Thank you. Over here.
Thank you. My name is Derek Davy. I'm a social justice volunteer, a long time in Winnipeg. And we are all of Winnipeg is so proud and looking forward for a successful Human Rights Museum of Canada, and that it'll be a tremendous success. However, we wonder why intermittently or on occasion you seem to be over budgeting. And I preamble that my question really is to say, do we have a definitive business plan that will be sustainable and functional for a long term? A business plan for this museum?
Yeah, Derek, thanks for the question and thanks for your involvement in the community. The answer, of course, is yes, we do. And one of the elements that really allowed for this sort of private sector initiative, again, the lead donor for all of this museum, the project has always been the private sector. They're the lead donor in terms of partnering with the federal, the provincial, and civic governments. But one of the things that really helped to make this something that was a reality, Derek, was the opportunity to have operating funds from the federal government. So the operating funds that we have, which the appropriations allocate of $21.7 million annually, allow us to make this, this entity to sort of work. But I also want to add to that, that there's also more revenue that's going to be generated. And so part of the business plan is generating additional revenue, whether it's through the availability of the facility, whether it's through tourism, whether it's through online sales, whether it's through the restaurant, or the retail that we have on site. So one of the areas that our brand development team are doing is looking at taking what is the 21.7 and increasing it so that we have a higher number, a higher dollar value to work with. Because again, please understand that one of the elements that the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, who, as I said in my comments, have raised $130 million and continue to raise money from the private sector across Canada and internationally, is that the ultimate goal is to have an endowment for student travel. Because that really was the essence, I think, of what Izzy looked at in terms of sort of dreaming big and being a part of something, to have a student travel endowment to allow students to travel from across Canada to Winnipeg so that they can be a part of learning about human rights and then, of course, go back into their community. So sorry to be a little long-winded there, but yes, absolutely we have a plan. One more question?
Sorry, there were two hands.
Yeah,
I'll save the voice a little bit. I've heard a great deal about conversation, and I think that's a wonderful idea, and I've heard a great deal about digital interaction. I have heard very little about on-site human interaction, and I work in museum theater, so I'm very concerned that this area would be opened up, because I've found in my own experience that direct human interaction is one of the best ways of teaching and of communicating ideas. And I'm just wondering, has there been any planning in that direction?
Absolutely. Can I just ask for your first name, please?
Brian Richardson.
Brian?
Yeah.
Brian, thanks very much for that. Absolutely. You know, part of the whole experience, and one of the areas, I know it's sort of tough when you see lots of elements that appear on the screen in different galleries, but the whole Canada Human Rights journey is really an opportunity to have live theater, to bring in interaction, to sort of make it come alive. Because much like music and much like theater, we see that as a strong element of human rights. Art is another way that we want to ensure that there's a human rights element. So the power of that opportunity to have the kind of dialogue that you and I are having now, but if it was Louis Riel, for example, that was out there talking about his last speech in Regina, that he said, and he was powerfully impacting that against this backdrop that was of a courtroom, of something that was very magnificent, sort of draw people in, we see it very much a part of what we want to do. And by the way, we're delighted to just offline get a chance to sort of chat further on it, but just so that you know, we're absolutely there, and you probably have some great ideas that we can gather from. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, so we're at the end of our time. I just want to point out Lise Harris, or Pincus, sorry. Still new. She's going to be standing at the back of the room. If there are any other questions, I'd ask that you contact Lise. She'll take note of your email address or phone number if that's your preferred method of receiving the information, and we'll take note of your questions and ensure that we forward them and include them in our frequently asked questions. So that being said, merci pour votre temps ce soir.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Opportunity to speak a little bit as to where we are today. Merci beaucoup. Drive safely.
Thank you.